Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of Reanimated. I'm AJ Conrad, here with Stuart Tiffin, my intrepid co-host, dealing with all sorts of interesting things on the West Coast. Hello, Stuart.
The reason why AJ is chuckling is because we've actually been talking for half an hour already before we did the intro.
But
so
we'll
you might not tell. You might not be able to tell by the time I'm done chopping this thing into shape. But hello. I'm seeing a lot more people getting vaccinated, which is...
Oh, well, we can talk about that because that's something going on here in New York, too.
I don't know that I want to talk about it.
Oh, okay.
I don't know, dude. I'm just kind of worn out with COVID. It's all week, every day. My job.
Your job is all COVID all the time. I get it.
Yeah.
Have you gotten vaccinated yet?
That's the thing. I'm seeing people in their 40s that I don't know if they have comorbidities or whatever, being like, I got my first appointment. And I'm like, I know for a fact there's only 1,000 first doses in all of Sonoma County that are going to be able to be scheduled next week. How do you count above everybody older than you?
Right. I mean, they opened it up to 60 plus here. So that sort of had a flood of things, though I will say that I helped a really good friend of mine who definitely, she and her roommate both have like significant comorbidities. And whereas it took me, probably a week or so, or at least a couple weeks to even find an appointment for me. For them, I found one within an hour, like once they asked me to help them.
Wild.
Which just, and it wasn't because of anything magical I was doing. It was just because they've opened up more sites here and opened up more appointments for the first dose, I guess. I guess the question is whether they have reserved anything for the second doses or whether this is sort of the J&J factor. But it seemed like almost most places have like the double, the Moderna and the Pfizer. I haven't even seen mass vaccination sites here yet with the J&J.
We had it, we got 1,700 doses of that last week that went out, and then nothing until the 23rd. Like, that's the end of J&J, because I think they just had that one, they had been pre-producing it, and then I think we are completely flat. It's actually super demoralizing to talk about vaccine here, because we haven't been able to do first doses in 3 weeks.
Wow.
All we're doing is second doses. And those 1,700 J&J. And it's super depressing. Everywhere else, the news is all rosy. Like, oh, America, we're all getting vaccinated. And I'm just like, I don't see this working out, man. It's going so slowly. We get 7,000 doses a week.
That's crazy.
For a community of 500,000.
Yeah.
And you need 2 of them.
Yeah.
This is going to take so long.
Yeah. Is it just the distribution with, like, are more doses going to, say, like, San Francisco and like the population centers? Is that why?
Well, yeah, the governor came up with this plan to vaccinate areas that are harder hit in like the Healthy Places Index, which is an equity-based formula. Equity is great; it's super necessary, but it does slow everything down. They're sending a lot of doses to LA and the Central Valley and Southern California.
So that's the one thing. So we've, now that New York has been opening this up more, and they've basically been adding different types of like employment and things to the list. So like hotel workers and taxi drivers. I think taxi drivers are already on the list, but anybody who's sort of like front facing and forced to deal with the public as part of their job is pretty much on the list now. So all restaurant workers, MTA workers, all that kind of thing. And honestly, if you ask me, like the MTA workers should have been number 1 on the list anyway, in addition to the frontline healthcare workers, for a couple of reasons. One is that they don't have a choice but to do this, and it keeps the trains running. But secondly, if you look at how they handled it initially, the MTA, like the number of employees that died from COVID was insane. So, it was just, and it was absolutely avoidable. And some of it's also the ventilation stuff down there and all that fun stuff. Another fun fact, post-COVID, they're suggesting that people just wear masks in the subways because apparently did we talk about this? That the pollution in the subways, like the particulate matter, such as things like asbestos and stuff like that is so bad that they
They're
said
just realizing this.
apparently they just completed this study, and it's not all stations, like it's like, and they didn't really, they were a little muddy about which stations that were affected, but that I'm like, oh, that gives me great confidence, like what other stuff are they not telling us about what's good. But so anyway, they're like, you may want to keep your mask on for your commute in the future. I'm like, oh, that's just dandy.
How many children have been taking the subway to
Right,
school like
right.
for their whole lives?
And the report is pretty, also, it's kind of upsetting if you live in New York just and spend any significant time on the subway. The question is whether it's just in the stations and whether that small amount of time you're in a station versus on a train makes a difference. But I mean, you
Don't the
gotta.
trains always stay underground in the
Well, they
stations?
do, but like I guess that the cars themselves have a filtration system and all that stuff. So, but still, it's kind of scary.
Huh.
But
So
anyway,
they don't smell like pee when you go on them?
I mean, depends on when you catch it. Whoever's been peeing, and they've
Yeah.
been.
When was the last pee incident? Okay.
Right. But anyway, I digress. I think that to me, the thing that's going on right now, and we won't talk too much longer since this is part of your daily and you've got to be totally worn and ground down by it. So, you're seeing definitely I think an unequal distribution around the United States and in specific states, depending on what's happening. It feels like states that had specifically done it by age versus by whatever weird class they were putting it in almost seem to be moving a little faster. So Connecticut seems to be moving pretty fast. I mean, and New York now is too, and some of the things that we were seeing earlier on, they seem to have worked out some of those things. So a few of the vaccination centers now have enough supply that they can have 24-hour appointments. So
Yeah, the
Javits,
24-hour stuff is really impressive, but
it is, and
that's not happening in a lot of places as far as I can tell.
so now it seems as if, at least in New York City proper in the boroughs, I think that it's probably possible to get an appointment if you need one. And there hasn't been, even though they opened it up to now they lowered the age range to 60 plus, and then some additional workers and additional conditions that are allowed. It doesn't seem as if there is a dearth of appointments. So people seem to be getting them pretty easily now. It seems to be running like clockwork. There was a horrible news story a couple weeks ago where elderly people were waiting in line at Javits for hours and hours and hours, like 8 hours, and fainting in line and stuff like that. And one of the things that they have also introduced, in addition to these 24-hour appointments in certain big vaccine hubs, are in-home vaccinations. So, and this is what I was saying before, which is like, you've got to imagine there's some elderly and infirm people that it's quite risky for them to go out, not just because, they may have a comorbidity that makes them a lot more susceptible. And
They were homebound beforehand.
right.
Even,
So to have to ask them to go not only once, but twice to some of these places and
Yeah.
then wait in line. So now they have a program where I guess they can sign up and a healthcare worker will come to their house for both doses. And to me, that seems like a very smart thing to do.
I feel like Meals on Wheels just needs to like hook up with a traveling nurse company and be like, all right, so
Let's do
in
this
addition
thing.
to your stroganoff, you're going to get a shot and we'll be
Yeah.
back in 3 weeks,
Yeah. Another phenomenon happening here in New York is that initially, as I think everybody has been reporting, there was a pretty big exodus out of New York, partially, especially people with kids, because it was just like such a small footprint to be stuck
like
at
moving
home.
permanently or just
I think like some were probably moving permanently. Some just were like, oh, let's ride this out in a place where we could actually go outside without a mask with our kid, or that kind of thing. But now it seems as if people are slowly coming back. So that's going to be interesting to see what happens. But interestingly, I've been sort of seeing reports of different workplaces and reporting different things in terms of what the expectation will be. And I definitely think that there's probably going to be like a lot more flexibility about where people work and what the office culture is. And I just think that there's going to be a pretty big number of changes just in the corporate culture in New York and the big, the Midtown mecca of like office buildings and things like that. I mean, at least a few law firms that I've seen have announced that they're not they're sort of like, well, we'll make one day a week a mandatory. Everybody's in the office on this day, and
Dude,
then
downtown San Francisco is a ghost town.
yeah,
Silicon Valley is basically scattered to the four winds. At least 115,000 jobs have moved outside of, like,
yeah.
there's still jobs that are, employed by companies ostensibly that are based in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, but their employees have moved all over the place. It's basically, rents are plummeting, and office space is becoming insanely available.
And I think we're going to see a shift. Now, I also would say that just based upon my conversations, not just with people in my industry, but people, friends and family and things like that, I think a lot of people really do want to have at least some part of time go back to the office, myself included. Part of mine is obviously because of my personal living situation, because we live in an open floor plan, so it's just my husband and I just don't have any privacy from each other when we're trying to work, and it has been tough to negotiate. And I think that we have figured it out, but I think both of us are looking forward to the day when we will be spending some time apart from each other too.
Do you think you want to move into a bigger place?
I think that's part of it, and that's always been something on our radar. I think that we probably have somewhat of a unique situation in that our living space is used as his art studio, as his, a photography studio. And so, and it has fantastic light, and it's just...
Doesn't really work with you there gumming up the works,
No,
huh?
it does not. But although, I mean, I will say it's not like he can actually do that now because people aren't allowed in our apartment, nor would we do that until there's a lot more vaccination rates happening. But so that's not like that had been happening. But in terms of him just having sort of the focus to edit photos and having that specific time, he actually built himself what I call his Harry Potter office, because it's like...
Is it under the stairs?
It might as well be. It's kind of in the if any other people in New York would have made this into like a bedroom with just their bed and have more space in the rest of the apartment, but because he has so much equipment for his photography career, it's all in there. So it's definitely pretty full up. But he put a tiny chair in there, like an armchair, and he puts on noise canceling headphones, and he goes in there to do work, which I feel semi guilty about, but it seems to work, and it is sort of tiding us over until we can get back to the office. I could not have picked a better pandemic partner in all of this, because I've seen some of the stress and tension that others have been dealing with, and I think we've weathered it pretty well. But it's definitely something that I think we'll be looking at and seeing how things shake out, like as everything starts to sort of open up again. So
Yeah.
But
Next
anyway,
thing you know, you'll be moving into a 4-bedroom Connecticut.
no.
A 6-hour commute
I don't,
to get to work.
So one thing I will say that, I know a lot of people who did that, and we had an option to kind of do that. And part of why we didn't do that was because, honestly, despite the small footprint of our apartment, our neighborhood is fantastic. We have access to a lot of outdoor space, parkland. We have, of course, my favorite, Greenwood Cemetery and Prospect Park, literally a short walk from our house. And then I would say that if we were to end up in another place with a little bit more room, absolutely non-negotiable is to have some outdoor space, probably some private rooftop space, because that has been a godsend, and I don't know that we would have been able to weather this as well, because it allowed us to have it's truly like one person over, but like socially distanced dinners and things like that, basically across the roof from another person. But it kept that sort of lifeline alive. And also gave us space to get away from each other, even if it was just a little while. So we'll see what happens. But I definitely think there's going to be an adjustment. And I think, I don't know, do you get the sense that a lot of people, I think, thought that everything was just going to snap back to being normal? And I just don't. I think it's going to be a little bit more of a adjustment for a lot of people.
Oh yeah, I mean any kind of what's the word? Any kind of idea I might have had about things going back to normal are certainly being shattered when we're having these conversations about our school district reopening, which is happening soon. Because the elementary school is going to be open from 8 until noon.
Oh, so
And
that's different.
if they're doing temperature checks, and it's going to be actually more disruptive to go back to school, because my work day is going to be cut in half. Whether so I can't have meetings around the time that I'm going to pick my child up from school. Also, and this is just dumb and maybe too personal, but they do these forehead temperature checks everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
My son is regularly 2 degrees hotter on his forehead than orally. Like if you give him an oral thermometer,
Yep.
it's like 98, it's 100 on his face. And so he's going to get sent home
All the
every day.
time. Yeah.
And I've already started writing to the school nurse to be like, look, my son is a special child. I don't know how to do this. And they're like, well, okay, we'll see. I think we're just we might just be told you can't come back to school until this like temperature thing is no longer a requirement. And I'm not sure when that's going to be.
Well, the weird thing about that is that it honestly doesn't tell anything because so many people don't even have a temperature with this.
40%. Yeah. And
And
maybe more among children. Yeah.
And the other thing, which I think, did you and I talk? I don't know. I don't recall if we did talk about it. Apologies for repeating myself. But most people are actually a lot lower anyway than the 98.6.
I'm
So
94.6 on this damn forehead thermometer. I like have a very thick skull, I think.
I don't know. I'm usually around like yeah, I'm usually around like a 96 or something like that. So, and this is actually something that's been happening collectively for a while, but everybody just has that 98.6 set in their head.
Yeah.
And exactly what you were just saying is that honestly, that's sort of a norm, but it can vary so much from person to person. So maybe he just runs really hot. My nephew actually has the same issue, by the way. So it has been an issue, and they just ended up keeping him home because it just was too much of a just stumbling block to have to go and pick him up every day.
But I just don't know when are masks and temperature checks not going to be a regular thing
Yeah.
at schools? I'm not sure.
I mean, I
it
guess
could go into the next school year.
my guess is until the vaccines are then approved for kids, and then
And even
it,
beyond, perhaps. I don't
yeah,
know.
but we'll see. But anyway, slowly though, things will I think shift back into somewhat of a normal thing, but I think it's gonna be a little bit of a painful reentry, unfortunately.
Yeah, I have no misconception about things snapping back to normal.
So I just think it shows that we're definitely not out of the woods yet, as much as people want it to be, and as much as people want everything to open. And are fatigued by this. I think we just have to be smart about it and still continue to do this stuff. So let's hope for the best.
Let's hope for the best.
But I think that there is a bright light. I definitely think that things are going to get better. But it's just not going to be automatic. And I think that's really what, I mean, and I am guilty of this too. I think that in everybody's mind, there was always like this, is there going to be, okay, there's a vaccine and now, okay, everything's restarted again and sort of back to normal, but I think it's just going to be a little slower than that. And so, hey, we'll just have to deal with it. And again, things are definitely getting better. And at least here in New York, cases are down to some extent. So that's a good thing too.
And in other places, things are getting worse because somehow, some way, the CDC's blog post about the zombie apocalypse and, that they made in 2011, we had covered it in the first year we were doing this podcast, which was in the Middle Ages. Somehow somebody rediscovered the fact that they have this page on the website and decided that the CDC is really concerned about a zombie outbreak in 2021. And so it was picked up by a dozen different, not reputable, but a dozen different news outlets this week saying, oh, CDC recently posted about a zombie outbreak. And then like it's really just it's clickbait, because then the comments are full of people making the same arguments that I just did, which is that it's been around for, since 2017. It's just to get people interested in preparing for disasters and yada, yada. But it still, makes me clench my fists in joy. No, in outrage.
Oh yeah. I mean,
you saw these articles, I'm sure too.
Yeah. I saw them and I was sort of surprised because we did cover this when it had first come out. And actually, even when we covered it, I think our commentary was, oh, really, CDC, this is how you're dealing with this. And it was primarily, I mean, I think it was more due to, like, I think they were trying to get people to prepare for, say, like hurricanes and earthquakes and things like that. And I don't know that global pandemic was necessarily there, although CDC.
I mean, it's CDC.
It is CDC, but like Or maybe it was like more Ebola, because that would make sense if it was 2017, and maybe swine flu was kind of a
Yeah.
part of this. But
It
anyway,
was 2012, I think, is when we were talking about it.
yeah,
2013, maybe.
yeah. So I don't
But
know.
yeah, they've been worried about this stuff for donkey's years.
Yeah. So anyway, but now people are discovering it probably because they have nothing else to do right now, which makes sense. Although, it's kind of interesting. Like, why just discover it now? It seems like it would have been a little bit more, it seems like somebody would have discovered this a little earlier on in the pandemic. But anyway,
Yeah, and it's weird that somebody obviously wrote about it, and then a bunch of other news sites were
picked
like,
it up.
"Ooh, this looks like juicy goss," but it's
Right.
not. It's
It's
old.
not.
It's old
It's
goss.
also a slow news cycle, I would say. There's
Yeah.
there's there's some things going on, and there's things. Maybe it's just people wanted to add a lighter note to it. I don't know. But
One of the other articles I saw that we didn't put in the show notes was somebody was saying, "Oh, you think you're so cool, Zack Snyder, doing a zombie show in Las Vegas with Army of the Dead? Well, Resident Evil, I forget which number it was, but Resident Evil 4, the movie with Mia, Jovovich, did Las Vegas with zombies
way back
earlier."
when,
And I'm trying to remember like the
and
actual
the
like
stand,
Vegas.
and the stand.
Were there zombies in the stand?
Well, no, but I mean, it's a
Yeah, but they were definitely, there was some, yeah, post dystopian stuff.
post-apocalyptic. Not to mention the Passage. The Passage definitely has a pretty big Vegas scene.
Yeah, and Casino.
Yep. So
That's not a real
I
entry in that
know
list.
I'm
Okay.
laughing. Anyway, but
Yeah, but I still think he's going to bring a fresh perspective to it, and it looks like it's going to be much more. The scope feels like it's going to be bigger, and then the scene of like zombies coming out of a Connex in Resident Evil. I don't remember much else. Other than they were in the desert, and there was like a Connex zombie fight scene. But that's all I really remember from Resident Evil. The one
I don't
that was
know.
in
They
Vegas.
start to blend. I vaguely remember it, but
You got burned out on that series of movies pretty quick. Well, not quick. I think we went through half of them, and then you were just like, "Stuart, I can't anymore. I'm done."
pretty much yes. But in other news, Greg Nicotero did some like weird interview about where to go during a zombocalypse, which, I think he's got some good points. Again, this is a little clickbaity, but there was a little light on the news this week, so let's be honest about that. But basically, he says you should go wherever people wouldn't go, or where they're scared to go, or they wouldn't necessarily think, that's a place to write out a zombocalypse. So specifically, he mentions a dentist office because I guess people don't like to go to the dentist. I will.
What's interesting here is that he is referring to a zombie trope popularized by Romero, and also Zack Snyder, I think, nodded to this in 2004, Dawn of the Dead, where zombies repeat behaviors that they had in life, which is not something we see too much in Walking Dead, except for in like episode 1, or the first few episodes of the show.
Right.
So it's interesting that he is going back to old canon that he does not work on right now when he makes this argument.
Right. Well, maybe it tells you where his loyalties lie. I don't
Still
know.
with Romero all these years later.
All Romero all the time. It's got to go back to the canon. I will admit that one of the reasons this was just me, like before I even read the article, when I saw the headline, I'm like, oh, because dental work will be hard to get, so you should go to the dentist to ride out the apocalypse. Because it's going to be hard to get work done on your teeth, and that can kill people pretty easily, more so
Makes a
than
lot of
people
sense,
think.
yeah.
So so anyway, that was what a misinterpretation of what the article was. But anyway, it's kind of funny to read it anyway.
Yeah.
But are we ready to talk about the next episode of Walking Dead?
Yeah, today it's tonight's episode, so we're a little early. And if you listen to this before you've seen it, spoiler alert. Let me say it before we talk about it, as for a change. This is episode 18, called One More, and for once we can talk about who directed it, because we've been not doing that.
Okay.
Shoot.
It's directed by Laura Belzy and written by Eric Mountain and Jim Barnes.
Yeah, and it's coming out today or tomorrow. Good grief. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, because we're a day ahead of ourselves, aren't we?
We didn't want to record on daylight savings just to save ourselves from that kind of.
Let's also talk about, this is a lesson learned from, we didn't learn it. We haven't learned it we only learned our lesson last year, even though it tended to happen a lot. But what we know is that we are not people that deal with daylight saving time very well. Like
No.
that's really what the lesson is. It took us many years to learn it, but we know it now. So hence our
I believe there's a federal bill now to stick with it, like to stay in one time. I think daylight savings all the time.
yes, that is true. So we will see what happens with that. I am definitely on board with that because I just think just leave it, spring forward, and leave it alone. I think that's
Yeah.
the way to go. But in any case, so we are saving ourselves today, and we're going to talk about this. And I was, this is also, one thing that I will say that I've noticed and we talked about a little bit is some of the reasons why maybe the structure of some of these episodes changed maybe, and maybe they had to figure out different storylines and things like that is because of COVID. Because you notice definitely that it's usually like not as many characters necessarily.
Yeah, I'm so feeling that now.
And
I
you're
mentioned that
feeling
last
it, and
week.
it's noticeable. And actually, I don't
Yeah.
know if you have finished yet with the whole WandaVision series.
Yeah.
I have not, but I did see some of the commentary was like, oh, there were some odd choices that were made in the finale, and apparently it's because of COVID because they had to keep everybody so far apart from each other and that kind of thing. So,
Okay. There are a lot of outdoor fight scenes in the
right,
finale.
right.
Interesting.
Apparently that was part of the calculus for that and the reasoning for that, and maybe changed it in ways that they weren't necessarily planning on, but that's just what they had to do. And so I think we are seeing this definitely in The Walking Dead, and it's becoming a little bit more noticeable. However, I also think it makes for some interesting character development and revelations because you are following only a couple of characters at a time. So last
Yeah.
week it was more Daryl and Carol hour plus an extra person thrown in, and I guess dog if you count dog.
Definitely count Dog. And Dog's younger self, so that's another whole
Right.
another whole actor.
Yeah, yeah,
Dog
yeah.
actor.
And this one is very much a Gabriel. And why am I forgetting
Aaron
an Aaron episode? And
and May's brother, who is also
oh,
played by Robert
Maze.
Patrick.
Yes.
I
So
thought that was pretty cheesy. But
yeah,
hey, if you can't have another actor on the set, go ahead and have Robert Patrick play his twin.
yeah,
Spoiler alert.
yeah. So
Yeah, but it's a very interesting episode. I thought this was quite impactful. I had feelings afterwards and during, but like afterwards, you're kind of just. I feel like I'm definitely in camp Team Aaron at the end of this episode, where I'm just a little bit shaken and not quite sure that everything's going to be okay.
right, and we can talk a little bit about that. The other thing I would say is once again they do the odd recap, kind of bringing the audience into where we are at this point, and again I don't know how you're feeling about it. I feel like it's unnecessary at this point.
This one worked better than the last one. At
Maybe it
least
worked better, but it was more synced with what was happening to some
yeah, that's
extent.
why it was the footage was actually related to what they were talking about.
Right. But in any case, and I should also point out that I believe that this is actually the 150th episode of the series overall,
Damn.
which is kind of crazy. So there's that too. But weird, voiceover and recap aside in the beginning, this jumps right into a.
The music was still too loud in Angela Kang's
It was.
epilogue.
It was.
I don't know why they're doing that to her.
It's very
She
strange.
delivers a really nice, charismatic epilogue.
Right.
Like, and then they have this like loud ass music that it's like, what did you say, Angela?
Yeah, it's kind of strange. But we jump right into sort of an adventure journey, sort of scouting effort with Gabriel and Aaron. And they are using a map that was provided to them by Maggie to basically go and try to find food and supplies for the Alexandria / whatever hilltop refugees. And
Let's just talk about what this means, like the implications of Father Gabriel and Aaron going on a 2-man scavenging mission. Like scavenging, it feels like they should be done with scavenging, and I think that that's kind of part of the message that you get over the course of this episode when they come up empty so many times, right? Scavenging was done 4 years ago, like not in year 7 or 6 of the apocalypse. They are trying to find stuff from the world that was, and that stuff is mostly gone, as we find out through the course of this episode. But this means that Alexandria is no longer subsistent. Like, they've lost their ability to farm, apparently, because of whatever the Whisperers did, which is weird. They didn't show us the extent of the damage. Like, Alexandria was standing on its own before. I mean,
It
they had the
was.
trade between the colonies, but
I mean, I
this
know
is
that there
bad.
was fire. I know there was lots of other things that happened. And so, but look, you have enough people and you have one community that was pretty much totally burned out of where they were. And so then you're having, and granted, they did lose a lot of people during the Whisperer attacks, but you still have a pretty large population of people that you have to keep fed. And it's not like produce is easy, like you still need a season to do it. So maybe they lost their stores and maybe there was other things going on. One thing that I just came to mind, just thinking about how desperate it appears, is that even, I know Oceanside is a bit further away, but you would think that they would broker some kind of like community something because there's still stuff you can pull from the ocean. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
Maybe it's like pretty just ways to figure out how to make it work and get them through. But again, this is like you don't have like the storage to you have to have a lot of supplies to keep people fed.
In the last episode, I mean, Daryl and Carol were basically going out for food too, and
Right.
they found one dead deer and were like, "Oh, this hunting ground is done, and that one might be good, but this one, like they're yeah." So I agree with you. Oceanside like fishing is probably way more successful in the
Right.
post-apocalypse than hunting, because deer can get eaten by zombies and fish probably don't much,
Well,
I
not to
assume.
mention, even if there are survivors, they're not only Oceanside really has the boats and stuff to go out and do it. So,
Yeah.
and then you don't really have people fishing or overfishing or whatever. So probably those populations are back. So my guess is that that's probably your best bet in terms of food source. Plus, you can dry fish, and because of the salt and all of that, you can preserve that stuff a lot better. I'm sure people will get really sick of dried fish at some
And how
point.
much salt can they produce? I
And
mean,
how
I know they're
much
on the ocean, but
well, I mean,
producing salt is pretty painstaking
it's
process, isn't it?
painstaking, but it's like, I mean, you can just do like salt beds and things like that. I mean, it's not
Yeah.
impossible. And so that to me seems a little bit more likely in terms of trying to get people over the hump for the food, like production. But again, they're showing this theme, so clearly food is scarce. They're looking,
Yeah.
they're scavenging. It's been several years, and honestly, even them looking for like canned foods, I don't know how many canned foods are going to actually be good after that many years. I mean,
It would definitely be like a lotto.
right.
Uh,
So anyway, so we know that this is what's going on, and we know why they're so driven, and both these characters have kids and that they need to get back to and that they want to keep fed, so that's part of the motivation. But it's also probably a little bit depressing back there, so they just keep going. And there's definitely like humorous moments in this, and I think that they're trying to show that, and similar to what they did with Daryl and Carol, these two specifically have a rapport. They're used to working together.
yeah.
They've been out, so they have a bit of a shorthand with each other. That's kind of fun to see. And again, this is one of the nice things I think about the way that they're shooting right now, is that you see these dynamics and you get to examine that a little bit more, and it's kind of a cool thing versus
Oh, it's super cool. You know that I'm on board with
oh
this.
no, versus like
One
a
other point about their children that is thematically relevant with last episode: neither of their children are theirs biologically,
right,
right?
right.
Gabriel's Coco is Sadiq's, and Aaron's is the child that they found at the Savior
Right.
people.
Right.
Rick killed that child's dad.
Yeah.
Oops.
Oops. So anyway, that's something that we're seeing as a theme, that this is basically found family for the
Yeah.
most part, and you have but that those
Because
loyalties.
Leah's child was also an adopted child. That's
Right.
all. It's all. Like, there seems like there's one of those every episode right now. So it's kind
Right.
of
Well, and then look at look at Judith.
Judith. Yeah.
So yeah, you've got a lot of that theme going on, and that the blood ties don't necessarily mean as much as other ties, and that I think that they really hit that home in this, don't you think? So
Huh.
so in any case, you've got these two dads out there, and
Just a couple of dads.
just a couple of dads. I mean, they definitely went for some pretty, just in terms of like the zombie makeup and zombie characters in this. There was definitely some super gross but funny moments. When they tried to pull the one walker out of the thing and the skin falls off. Then there's the
Oh
mud
God.
walker. Then there's the walker up against the fence. One of my favorite things was actually just, although again, I'm kind of like, would this make sense? Because wouldn't this draw more of them? But if there's sort of, walkers that have just kind of gone quiet for a while or hibernating because nothing's around, Gabriel like threw the timer into the field to make sure that they knew where they were. I just feel like the loudness of that would probably draw more if there were
From
others
the woods.
around.
There's
I don't know.
something really weird going on in this episode with zombies where like it's part of the theme of the episode. Everything is tired, run down,
Mm-hmm.
defeated, but the zombies are too. Like that one zombie has been leaning against that post for so long that it's like melted to it.
Mm-hmm.
When it tries to get up, it leaves a bunch of its back on there, which is super gross. That whole field full of zombies just lying down. When do zombies lie down? What are they,
Right.
like cows?
Well, I don't know. So that's happening, and then the other theme throughout this episode, and sort of the scenery that they keep seeing, or the stories that they keep seeing. They come across
Yeah.
a burnt out cabin with skeletons on the ground, and it looks like a little family that had been killed,
Cho-
basically.
or chosen to die
Or maybe
together or
they
something.
chose, I don't
Yeah.
know. And then you see another one with like a horseback rider who had basically, who knows what happened, but he was
They,
all
that was
skeleton.
like
That was
some
weird.
dinosaur fossil situation where they were like riding on the horse but on the side, and there was another
Right.
one behind them. Like they've been maybe blown up. It was hard to tell.
Right. And so they're really coming up goose egg just with so much like finding supplies. They haven't found anything. And then the map gets destroyed in the mud bath zombie episode.
Yeah.
And
And
that is
the mini mart scenario also where they come up empty with the mini marts full of zombies, and on the roof there's another man and woman maybe who have chosen to shoot themselves on that mattress. There's a gun
right.
in one of their hands. And so they just keep seeing these signs everywhere of people giving up. And that's just part of this theme throughout the whole episode. And definitely, although definitely in the beginning and at the end, of people just being like opting out at this point in the game. And that's got to be affecting them, even though they're not talking about it.
And you definitely see, and that again, this is the other nice thing about having just sort of the focus on the two characters. You see the reactions to in their faces just when they're taking this in.
Hmm.
Each little vignette that they kind of pass by, you can see them processing it maybe in different ways. And it's honestly, it's they both feel as if they're worn out and impressed. And at one point, Aaron's like, I just can't do this. Like, can we just go back?
Yeah.
And Gabriel's like, no, one more, because I think he just doesn't want to go back open, like empty-handed.
Yeah, but they've been out
And
for 2 weeks
yeah,
doing this. This also reminds me of Tara and Heath when they were driving around in that
yeah,
RV. They'd been on the road for 2 or 3 weeks and they found like 2 cans of food, and
yeah,
that was right before they found Oceanside. That was a long time in the chronology. That's years and years ago. I think that's
right,
before the time jump. It's also when Heath was on the show, obviously, and they were coming up empty on their scavenging run, and they had a car, and they'd been on the road for a couple of weeks, as they said. And so Aaron and Gabriel are on foot doing this for 2 weeks, and also and I'm just like, you have no chance, man. It
right.
doesn't feel like a mission that they can win.
Right. And and I mean, look, and they've been using this map, and because they lose it, and then they were like, oh, we'll follow our tracks back, and then all the rain and all that stuff happens. And there's just this really, like, I think an overall sort of depressing aspect to, or downtrodden aspect to how the characters are feeling, and the way that this story is being told, just this grind that is not coming up with any sort of joy or light, until they find this warehouse, which was nowhere on the map. Interesting, right? So that's kind of and then I have to say, like, even how they explored the little mini mart, and then when they come across the warehouse, I was definitely like, I think that there's certainly some comfort level that I think that these characters have with making sure that there aren't walkers or things like that. But I still felt like they were being careless in the warehouse, because there's so many sort of corners in there that are dark, and not, there's no lighting. There's a lot of stuff in the warehouse, and this is the first place where they actually find something.
That They are. I mean, they do the standard procedure
Yeah,
of like banging something to find out if there's zombies in there. What
right.
they find in there is actually terrifying. I don't have any problem with Aaron screaming
Yeah, no, I
when he
mean, if
opens a
you,
door and finds a giant wild boar. That is a big pig.
I mean, haven't we seen Game of Thrones? Come on. Boars are
Yeah,
not things to be trifled with. And they are super dangerous, honestly. So they will totally kill you.
I'm
So,
surprised that he managed to kill it. I assume he just whacked it with his club fist, but like, wow.
yeah. So,
It doesn't. It seems like he just hit it and it went down, but I don't know if it would have been that easy. Is what I'm
yeah,
saying.
agreed, because that was a pretty big boar.
Yeah.
But in any case, like, I don't know, there was just a part of me that was worried about them. And I think that honestly, I think it was built this way and it was intentional, because there were so many dark corners. It didn't feel safe. It didn't feel secure to me somehow. And ultimately, I was right. So I think that just struck me. I was a little bit on edge, even as they were having these really great moments where they were, drinking this amazing whiskey that they had found. And, I did like how Gabriel knew about it and was trying to
I was
get.
a little surprised that that was the case. Yeah, like he doesn't seem like the go-to character to have like the refined whiskey palate.
Right.
I
And
like the guided tasting though that he gives Aaron. He's like, all right, first you smell the bouquet and then you taste it and
right.
then you pair it with food with wild boar.
Right. But I also like that he knew what he was looking for. So he was like, there's got to be something in here somewhere, right? So where he even went looking for it, you felt like he was like, all right, there's got to be something good in here. And the other thing that I was thinking while they were that made me nervous, is that, look, it's not like spirits are something that this group has come across a lot. I mean, I'm sure they have a little bit of a store of them, but it's not like they have the ability to drink anything every day. And these two polished off that whole bottle.
Yeah.
That is a lot for people that don't probably no longer have a tolerance, no matter what your tolerance was
And they're
before.
probably already dehydrated. Yeah, I mean,
Right.
they at least they made a show of Gabriel feeling like total ass the next day,
Yeah.
but it was still, yeah. And of course, anytime people get drunk and they're not inside their outpost or inside their walls, like the only place I feel like it would be okay to get drunk is at the very heart of Alexandria. Not certainly not out on the road. And why they couldn't just pocket the bottle or put it in the backpack and take it back with them. I don't know. I don't know if Gabriel was intending to do that. He tried to keep it, you know, to just a sip at first, but then once the poker starts, they're already halfway through it.
I know. Well,
And by
I
the
mean,
time by the
the
time they get to the
slippery.
drunken ramblings, I think it's completely gone.
Yeah, my only commentary on that is exactly what he was saying, is that is not a whiskey to get drunk on. Do you know what I mean? Like, you do want to savor it.
Mm.
So I don't know. I don't know. Maybe the self control, maybe the fact that they hadn't found anything positive,
Yeah,
and
could
as
just be a symptom of their depression, basically
well,
being on
right,
this
and
horrible road trip.
and Aaron even said it. He was like, "We've had a very long day, and long couple weeks." And so, and it was, those interactions between them were pretty good. Then they mix in the bluffing with the cards thing.
Uh-huh.
So
Show
that
the
was,
bluffing in Act Two, and
yep.
yeah,
And so they definitely put a linchpin on that at the end. Those moments were amazing with them. I felt like the way the shots were incredible. So I really liked how they did, again, much like the last episode, I just liked how they did the storytelling here.
it
And
was so nice to have a long, lingering monologue with Father Gabriel and
yeah,
Seth Gilliam, who hasn't gotten nearly the amount of screen time he deserved. They've made his character way cooler than it was when we first met him in season three, but three, right? I think three.
yeah. And I mean, that monologue, Angela Kang was saying he did that in one take. And that's a pretty long monologue to do.
Yeah, just staring at the camera
Yep,
also.
and he did an amazing job with it. I just thought that was really done well, and the shots and the shot was amazing. So, and you learn a lot more about him. And I mean, this is the thing. I feel like this is a character that we've wanted to know more about. So I'm very glad that they've taken the opportunity to highlight him a little bit, and we get to know a little bit more about what brought him into the ministry. And we heard a lot about his parish, but we've heard about things more in negative terms.
Yeah.
from the moment that they find him. So I really liked the storytelling here because he's talking about something like a mentor of his and how he thought of the world and how he learned some of the things that he learned how to do. And you see Aaron really responding to it, and basically saying, you really need to start preaching again. But you also hear from Father Gabriel about why he doesn't, and that there is a crisis of faith here. And we know that this has been going on for a while. We know, I mean, look at some of the interactions he's had with people and some of the things he's seen. And so you can understand why he might not feel so good about going out there. Because his whole worldview has been totally shifted. So that's kind of, this was just some cool interactions. And both of these actors, I think, are phenomenal. So I loved seeing this interaction with them. But I especially loved seeing Seth Gilliam highlighted here in such a good way.
It's a great couple of characters to highlight in an episode like this, for sure. Because Aaron, similarly, has not gotten nearly as much. They've both been built up more since we first met them. But I mean, over the last few episodes or seasons, since, the end of the Savior War, when Father Gabriel definitely became like an Old Testament preacher, more of like the Father Odo from the Bay of Tapestry. I don't know if you remember that classic. Bishop Odo, I guess. He's more of a war priest, a cleric, if you will. And so, yeah, just getting more into his head. Loved it. Love all that, for sure. And then, but, if you do get drunk in the zombie apocalypse and you're not nestled deep within Alexandria, you're going to get in trouble. And maybe even if you are, I don't know. They haven't explored that too much. But getting drunk in The Walking Dead is one of those things you just can't do without repercussions. And so there are some.
Right. But these interactions and this lead up I felt like they built this story so well. They crafted it incredibly well, because it led to the next sort of part of this story. And,
It does, I think, as well, we know these characters pretty well, even though we're saying like how great it is to be reintroduced to them and deepen our understanding of them. There was never really any doubt in my mind that they were not going to play the Russian roulette game the way that Maze wanted them to.
I figured that it was going to play out that way. I think that the interesting part was more going to be how Maze, the character we'll talk about in a second, reacted to it. And it's exactly how I thought it would kind of go down. But the interactions I think it was basically just a very nice reminder about the connection between the characters so that you're not really surprised about how they decide this game is going to play. And so I thought but it was just sort of a confirmation about who they were before they went into it. And so when poor Aaron just goes out to have a pee, he gets waylaid by this other angry character. I mean, it would have been cool if they had brought Terminator into The Walking Dead at this point and made him the metal crazy Terminator from Terminator
T-1000?
The T-1000. But I'll take it. They definitely have lined up some pretty cool little guest stars, and this is no exception. So it was I don't know. He plays this very well, and his makeup was pretty cool in this. So
like Angela Kang says at the end of the episode, he has effortless menace. I think that's a really good.
I think
way
that's
to sum
about
it up.
right. And he added.
He did in T2 also. All he had to do was look at the camera and run with his hands out like he was chopping wood with his hands. And you were like, that guy's terrifying. So even, how many years later, 20-something years later, he's still got it. Robert Patrick can still ice down a room with just like a look.
Right. The interesting thing, though, is that he can equally play, I think a very effective hero/law person, detective. And so that's interesting, too. Like, he's got a pretty... He can play an authority figure, either authority good or bad, so it's kind of interesting. But
isn't he a stand-in for Fox Mulder and the X-Files for a few seasons?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So it's like, so there's some kind of cool things. Like, he's just an interesting actor that way. But he's very much dressed up in a post-apocalyptic survival stuff. He's got some layers.
The poncho he was wearing when we first met him made me think he was a Reaper, like the other guy was wearing a ghillie suit. But I was a little concerned because he also had an AK or an SKS. I was a little bit like, this guy's going to be another tie-in to the Reapers, and then they're really in trouble. But
Yep.
he turned out to just be a lone wolf, so
Yep.
not such a big deal.
Not such a big deal, but he's definitely been out there a while, so his sanity is certainly in question. And then as the conversation goes on, we can see that, and it's an interesting thing because he is not incorrect because they have invaded his space. They drank his whiskey. They ate his boar, which, as he pointed out, do you think it got into that room alone?
The thing is, if he is actually living here, and I know they went upstairs and it was smelly, there would be the smell of people living here. If he was actually inhabiting the downstairs, they would have been able to tell, I think, by the smell.
Well, I think that he generally probably stays in the upstairs, which is why they didn't,
Maybe.
come across him because he's a little crazy for obvious reasons, as we'll find out later. But he plays this out pretty well because Father Gabriel doesn't know whether Aaron's alive. He asks a few times, and the thing that's like super creepy is that he repeats a lot of the things that Gabriel and Aaron had been saying the day before, especially things that Gabriel had mentioned, which is that evil people aren't the outliers anymore; they're the rule. They're not the exception. They are the rule now. And so he's throwing stuff back at Father Gabriel. And, he even clearly, so clearly he's been somewhere where he witnessed or heard everything that they were doing. And so could have at some point probably taken advantage of them even worse. Like he could have tied up Gabriel. He could have done a lot of stuff while they were both inebriated. And so It's kind of interesting how this plays out. But in fact, he just has Aaron tied up to a chair in another room. He's doing menacing, threatening, crazy things with Father Gabriel. And I mean, honestly, mocking him because, he says he uses all the Bibles that they found for toilet paper. And, he, as his story unfolds, he's basically saying that, hey, why should I care about you people? Nobody cares about me. And this is even what happened. The closest people to me betrayed me. And it turns out, at least as far as we know at this point, that his brother was stealing food. Now, also, he mentions his brother as a family. So clearly there's a reason why this was happening, right? And his brother attacked him when he called him out on the stealing of food. So who knows how that whole scenario played out. But I would say that if you're a parent trying to protect your family, probably getting food to the kid or, I don't know, seems like sort of a priority. So I wonder what actually happened in this scenario. But
all right, well, I guess we'll never know.
We won't know now.
Gabriel certainly seems to take him at his word, though, based on his actions at the end of the Russian roulette game, which was really pretty surprising to me. I did not see that coming. Also because, partially because Ross Marquand, who plays Aaron, does not take his eyes off of Maze, even though he must be looking at Gabriel walking around in the background.
Yep.
But yeah, that was... So I was definitely sent back to Deer Hunter. I don't know if you have Russian roulette movie.
Nope, that's the
flashbacks.
That is the one. That is definitely the one that flashed before my eyes. And I think that they did this really well. He's convinced that they're going to turn the gun on each other. They don't ever. And even at the end, when it's clear that the bullet is loaded into the chamber, I mean, I was kind of honestly, what I was waiting for was for Aaron to turn and shoot him in the head. I didn't think that's how I thought that was going to end.
That's how Deer Hunter ends, right? Because they end up putting, I think, 3 bullets in the gun. And so he's like, well, I got pretty good odds at this point. By the time they finish the game, it's 1 in 3. There's like a third, right? Except that they hear the bullet lock into the chamber. And so he has a loaded pistol. Yeah, he could have turned to fire. That's him making a point also, and the show making a point that Aaron wouldn't do that. I think Gabriel might have in this case. I think
Gabriel would have, yeah. And clearly Gabriel takes action. But I'll also point out that, even Aaron's rules when he used to bring people into the community, one of the rules is that, the questions that they would ask people, like, did you kill people and how did it happen? And the scenario which Maze has laid out for them is one where they would not have been able to bring them into the community no matter what. So, like, I don't necessarily...
Not necessarily.
I don't know.
I mean, Rick killed a lot of people. They didn't say... They would say why. It was like, how many zombies have you killed? How many people have you killed? And why, I think, were the 3 questions.
Right.
There was never, to me, a clear delineation of what the wrong answer was to the why question. It was. I think it had to be... I think the idea was that it was self-defense, but... I mean, that wasn't true for Rick's group. Not every time, anyway.
Well, in any case, like, Gabriel just takes care of business pretty quickly. So we've learned to never bluff or never, never doubt Gabriel's ability to bluff, I suppose.
For sure.
And, you know, this is pretty convincing, and it's probably why it's so jarring. But basically, both he and Aaron tell Maze who they are and that they can help him and save him and that this community is for broken people. And then Gabriel takes him out, toot sweet, with Aaron's hand. So there's that. And then, you know, we think that this is about the end of it. And then they both realize, oh, well, he was listening to us. There's got to be some other layer to this, or maybe there's more supply somewhere, and they discover that his brother, his identical twin brother, so again they cut down on the guest stars in this because it's just Robert Patrick again, his brother is chained to a radiator or something, or a pipe, and his family is dead because he played the Russian roulette with them and killed them,
and they've been dead for
a
years
while. Yeah. And he's definitely, you know, not in a state that I think clearly is in a state where he is done, and so he takes
Gabriel approaches him, hands out, and says things like, "We're not going to hurt you. You can come with us. We're going to free you. We're going to get you." Yeah. All things that he's basically heard him say to his brother downstairs.
Right. Although, I mean, I think he just, you know, and he takes the gun, and you think that it may end one way, but he just takes himself out. So it's like this very weird little circle.
Yeah. With the end of that, they get a couple of bits of they're looking at like the photos of the two twins,
the family.
I feel like Robert Patrick could have been de-aged a little bit for that, but he has a very young child for being a dude who's probably in his 70s or late 60s. And then they get out into the wilderness, and then Aaron is like, yeah, let's do one more, and the water tower, and they're moving in that direction. They're not going back to Alexandria. I don't know if we'll see the end of this little story, if they'll like come across some sort of massive cache of food, kind of like Daryl and Rick did when they met Jesus. I feel like these scavenging stories never work out the way that we want them to.
I mean, and I also felt like part of why Aaron wanted to do one more is because he's definitely processing and he's still shaken by what just happened. So maybe he's just not ready to go back yet.
Yeah, that, and they need something good to happen.
Right.
Like, this was a pretty big downer episode, obviously. And you're left thinking, all this negativity has really gotten into Father Gabriel. And we need something good to happen to like shake him up and have him become a good guy again. Because you're definitely, at the end of this episode, you're like, oh, are we the baddies?
Right.
I think the answer is yes. I think Father Gabriel is one of the baddies at this point.
Right. But I enjoyed this whole episode, and honestly, I wanted to see more of it. I kept wanting it to go on after it was ended. But, you know, it was definitely it was satisfying, just as it was satisfying to see Daryl and Carol, even with the conflict between them. And it's interesting because they've basically showing these two sets of characters, both who have been very close and have a lot of trust with each other, but are kind of working through some things within their personal relationships with each other. So that's kind of interesting. So I guess we'll see a little bit more of this, and I'm curious to see what the next episode holds. But so far, I'm really enjoying this. I'm still very happy it's back on the air, and honestly, I'm totally on board with some of the changes that they've had to make, and I think that they're doing a great job at working around it. And this has been a nice shift from sort of
probably going to be jarring when we get the whole cast back together, or like a whole field full of zombies. But yeah, we got 3 more of these to go before. I mean, honestly, Fear the Walking Dead starts the week after this little run ends, and so we are being spoiled for zombie Walking Dead goodness here.
Yeah, I'm not complaining. And
it's going to carry us right up to Army of the Dead. Yeah, we're going to be in good shape.
Well, after the one we had ahead of this, I feel like this is a great thing happening right now.
We needed a good run. We needed one more for us.
Yes. If any of our listeners have any comments about one more, please feel free to send us your comments.
You can tweet at us at ReanimatedPcast, email us at reanimatedpodcast@gmail.com, and our show notes, as always, where you can leave us a note or click on any of the links that we've been talking about, is reanimatedpodcast.com.
Well done. I clearly need some lunch because I'm fading apparently. But in any case, yeah, please feel free to reach out to us. I'm curious to see what people think about it. And looking forward to reviewing the next episode with you, Stuart.
Absolutement.
All right, until next time, ciao.
Au revoir.